morning, students. So, today we'll be discussing urban landscape ecology as a planning strategy. It's very interesting and important lesson for this entire course. So, today we'll be discussing landscape ecology fundamentals. We will discuss some theories which are applicable for the planning strategies. We will discuss some models and tools, planning strategies with case examples and the future direction. So first let us start with the fundamentals. We have started this landscape ecology fundamentals in previous module as well. What is this urban landscape ecology? The study of the interaction between spatial patterns, that is the land use, and the flows of energy, species and nutrients, which together we describe them as ecological processes. So, it's a spatial pattern and ecological processes in an urban environment where human beings are very dominant species. Key distinction: unlike traditional landscaping, which is often aesthetics oriented or ornamental, landscape ecology is a structural and functional one. Planning principles derived from landscape ecology links pattern process understanding with spatial tools to design multifunctional, resilient, and equitable urban landscapes. So, if we remember, we had discussed city in ecology and ecology of the city. So, it's a shift from city in ecology to ecology of the city. Nature exists only in designated spots. City is a separate one from the nature. That was the old paradigm. The new paradigm talks about interurban matrix, including building, roads, drains as an ecosystem. Biophysical and biogeochemical processes, energy flow patterns, and human activities are intertwined. The goal of this particular concept is to manage the entire landscape for ecosystem services like cooling, drainage, biodiversity comprehensively. So, we'll be discussing some of the theories which are very much relevant for this today's discussion. So, first one is the pattern process scale paradigm. Richard T.T. Foreman and Michelle Gordon, they brought this idea in the forefront. Urban landscapes are mosaics of patches, corridors, and matrix. That is the basic premise of this particular paradigm. So, they talked about patch corridor matrix model, which explains that the cities are not chaotic but structured mosaics. Patches, we understand patches like parks or buildings, they are embedded in a matrix, often a residential or transportation network, and connected by corridors such as greenways or roads. So that's the way in the pattern process and scale paradigm patches comes in. Patterns influence the ecological processes. Spatial patterns dictate the flow of energy and matter. High impervious surface connectivity that facilitates heat flow. As an example, we can look at it like UHI effect it creates. While fragmented green patches, they restrict the species movement. So you can see how the patterns are influencing. Anisotropic resistance in an urban environments mean that flows are direction dependent. Whether it's a flow of energy or even the wind flow, they are having a direction. Scale, the next phrase which we have to understand under this paradigm, that talks about the hierarchical patch dynamics HPD framework. Fine scale instability, like a single lot getting cleared, that's an action taken on a very fine scale, a small patch that can be incorporated into broad scale stability. So, a small scale instability, if it is bringing when we are clearing a small plot, that can be taken care in a broader scale. Let's say regionally, we are going for a grid network. So, the pattern process scale design paradigm implies human design is the primary scalar driver. The next concept is the spatial heterogeneity and fragmentation theory. Cities consist of fragmented green open spaces. In the cities, you cannot expect that green spaces are continuously there, like the agriculture or the forested areas. And as they are fragmented, we are having uneven ecological functions. We discussed that previously as well, if you remember. Urbanization drives a mosaic sequence of perforation, dissection, and attrition, and it results in high spatial heterogeneity, where the green spaces vary wildly in function, like manicured lawn or a remnant forest patch, and often small and isolated. If it is fragmented, it will be isolated. Landscape metrics help diagnose this fragmentation. So you can actually diagnose this particular fragmentation through quantitative metrics as well. These metrics are required to move beyond visual assessment. Visual assessment is much more subjective. So we can go for quantitative one, which is much more objective. Key metrics include patch density. Higher the density is, more fragmentation is happening. And the age density. Higher it is, more age effects. These metrics reveal that fragmentation often increases monotony with the habitat loss. We will talk about them again. Now we will be discussing the connectivity theory. Ecological flows depend on connected networks like greenways, riparian buffers. Connectivity is the degree to which the landscape facilitates movement. So it is very important to understand that whether the city is actually facilitating habitat or not. Structural connectivity, physical continuity. A riparian buffer strip of more than 30 feet wide is a good one. Functional connectivity, behavioral movement. Baths are using stepping stones. You remember stepping stone, that phrase? Please go back and read it. So, baths are using that stepping stone to go for the next patch. So, the key insight of this connectivity theory is that in cities, private backyards and semi natural areas often form the critical matrix that connects public greenways, and it supports species like golden cheeked warble and many others. The next theory we'll be discussing, that's the D, that is disturbance and resilience theory. Urban environments, they face constant disturbance. We know that. Planning must ensure resilience. Cities face press disturbances, which is chronic pollution, heat, and pulse disturbances. It happens maybe after few years, like floods, hurricanes. But in today's time, floods are also trying to be a pressing disturbance. Resilience is not just about bouncing back, that's the engineered one, but also about adapting to a new stable state, which we discussed about this adaptation. Ecological resilience without collapsing. Landscape structure affects how systems recover. Redundancy and diversity in the landscape helps in this recovery process, like multiple small parks versus a one large one will enhance the resilience. You may have the same area in total, but you distribute it. So the structure matters, not only the total area. The adaptive cycle, release and reorganization, that suggests that post disaster periods are critical windows for redefining urban form. And throughout the history of urbanization, even the very modern one, you will find that many cities are taking these disasters as an opportunity as well after the disaster happened. The last one I will be discussing, that is E, the ecosystem services and landscape function theory. If you have noticed the last three theories, C, D, and E, they are starting with the actual. C is with the connectivity, D is the disturbance, E is the ecosystem. Spatial configuration influences ecosystem services, which we discussed. It is not just the amount of green space, but its configuration. Like cooling, you need the clustered trees. That is better. Stormwater connected buffers regulate flooding better than isolated patches. Supply versus demand. There is often a spatial mismatch. Services are produced in the periphery at the supply line but needed in the dense center where the demand is, requiring flow analysis. Models and tools, that's the next section which we'll be discussing. I'm bringing back the discussion of the patch corridor matrix model because it's so very important that it's a fundamental model we can consider. It was developed, as I discussed, it's Foreman Gordon. The patch, distinct areas of habitats, remnant patches, introduced patches, remnant patches which are left over, introduced patches which has been introduced, and disturbance patches are the areas which got disturbed. And these are so very crucial for biodiversity anchoring and their habitat as well. The corridor, the linear elements, and the crucial for the flow and connectivity. The flow I was discussing just in the previous slide. That's the periphery and the core, and I need a flow to connect them. How you can connect them? You can connect them with line corridor, very thin, maybe hedges only. Strip corridors, maybe you are having a bioswale strip, or stream corridors, the best river floodplain. Those areas you are continuously maintaining. Now we come for the third dimension, that is the matrix, the dominant background. It can be built up residential areas, it can be industrial areas. That determines the overall resistance to movement of species. Dominance, it can be hostile, it can be conducive, and permeable. That means it is allowing the water to move. That is very important. Permeability, if you try to extend the concept, it is also allowing wind to move in. The application planners can actually take advantage of this model, and they have to really look at the city not as a legal plots but as this interacting mosaic which we were discussing through patch, corridor, and matrix. Let us see that example. You can see the patches here. This is the corridors here, and this large space is the matrix. And these are the red zones which are having the disturbances in the patches. So this is the landscape matrix, you can see, and patch matrix model, this is called as, and this is the gradient model where you can see the surface matrix. So for the patch matrix model is the landscape, and for the gradient model is the surface matrix. So the fragmentation we have discussed about it. Now let us bring back those terminology of the patch density, edge density. What is now patch density? Now let us understand the terminology like patch density. Number of patches per unit area. Very high patch density often indicates fragmentation. What is edge density? Length of edge relative to the area of that patch. The high edge density increases exposure to disturbances like noise, heat that can percolate in. We will also discuss this with examples later on. Another very important phrase is the ENN, Euclidean nearest neighbor, that is distance to next patch. If that distance is increased, that means isolation has also increased. That means from this patch to this patch, if the distance has increased. Mapping the flow of life. Now we will be discussing other methods, and where we will every time bring the focus like GIS connectivity analysis. The focus of this analysis is mapping the flow of life. You can opt many different analysis methods, and one of the most opted one is the least cost path analysis. Its algorithm uses GIS to calculate the path of least resistance for wildlife moving between patches, the patches we were mentioning. You can also refer to this image. It follows contours of vegetation and avoid the barriers for this movement. What is the input required? Resistance map. It is bringing out to represent resistance surfaces like roads. If it is having, then it's a very high cost. If you are having the forest, it's a low cost. That's the way it is getting assigned certain numerical score as well. What is the output? Optimal ecological corridor routes. That's the output of this. Circuit theory, that also maps the flow of life, that models the landscape like an electrical circuit to identify pinch points, that's the bottlenecks, where connectivity is fragile, most weakest point, and needs protection. So that's the way we can map the flow of life. Now we will be discussing habitat suitability and restoration mapping. Prioritizing these interventions, for that it is very much useful. We use maxent, maximum entropy. If you remember, we discussed this particular maximum entropy for a case study as well previously. So this is used for the habitat suitability map. This predicts species distribution based on the environmental variables like vegetation density, distance to water, etc. So we can use this particular modeling technique to identify areas with high potential for biodiversity if restored. Another thing we can check, that is restoration priority mapping we can do. Once we have identified that we have a strategy to restore, then let's see which are the areas shall be restored first. There we do overlaying the connectivity gaps with the habitat suitability map, which you have done in the previous stage, to find the exact plots of land to acquire or restore. What is the purpose of this? Maximum ecological return on investment. Where to do it? So that we can restore best, highest potential of biodiversity we can bring back. Next one we'll be discussing, that is for landscape metrics and mapping tools. Landscape metrics, Fragstat, R you can use to measure the patch metrics, patch size, shape index, edge density. These are the parameters through which you can do the landscape metrics analysis. What you get outcome of this analysis is the connectivity, landscape division index, probability of fragmentation that you get out of this landscape metrics. Similarly, you can use heat island hotspot maps, satellite data like Landsat, Sentinel, LST for broad citywide patterns you can capture. Sensors like LOR, LoRaWAN or mobile sensors for street level microclimate and canyon effect mapping. That's the way we can go for heat island mapping. Now we will come back that landscape matrix mapping tools to understand that how we can map the ecosystem services supply and demand. Matrix analysis like Bouchard matrix linking land cover to service potential. The purpose is to identify service bundles and the hotspots where the supply is less than the demand. That's the hotspot where it has to flow. Another matrix is land cover diversity indices, Shannon diversity index and the Simpson diversity index. Any one of them will be very useful for doing this land cover diversity mapping. Spatial models, land suitability analysis, one of the most common technique, using the multi-criteria decision analysis, and we use AHP, analytical hierarchical process. We do the land suitability analysis. Which are the steps involved in this? You first select the factors, slope, land use, like that. Then you reclassify it. It goes for the weighted average and then you go for the overlay technique. And you identify the land suitable for either changes or you need to restore. All these things you can do with this. There are also In today's time, as the tools and techniques have improved, we get the urban growth simulation models like Sleuth is there, Urban Sim is there. So what Sleuth does, cellular automata model it uses based for predicting the physical form and sprawl patterns. What it uses, slope, land use, exclusion, urban, transport, hillshades, etc. parameters. In the urban sim, we find the application of agent-based model, and this is very good for predicting the socio-economic dynamics. That is very important, and I think in this entire week we have discussed not only socio-ecological framework, we have also discussed the socio-ecological technical framework. So these models are actually supporting this journey. And we can also see the vulnerability models are available, which links the landscape pattern like impervious connectivity to flood risk or heat vulnerability using the regression models. So just see, we got that SES once again, the socio-ecological system and the governance integration, linking social data with landscape structure. That can be done using the census data, bringing back on the spatial map. You can use NLCD or canopy data as well. And the concept came from understanding the luxury effect, how wealth correlates with the biodiversity. That can be studied using this social data on the landscape structure layer. Public participation, we have discussed this with PGIS previously also, that residents are mapping valued spaces to identify cultural ecosystem services, CES, and also understanding CEB, cultural ecosystem benefits. And satellites cannot capture it. So this public participation GIS helps a lot to understand this social fabric. We have discussed the environmental justice also, that also can be overlaid. You can use the overlaying heat vulnerability index over the social vulnerability index. And then you can link that which community is getting that heat vulnerability more. So identifying high cluster, hotter and poorer is a very important outcome to prioritize the green infrastructure investment. So these are several models. You can go into them for detailed understanding. I am giving you only the precursors for it. Now we'll be coming to the planning strategies. And we would like to learn that from this landscape ecology, what principles we can derive for the planning. First group of discussion will be for the landscape connectivity planning. Green corridors, riparian buffers. The example is Barcelona. You can look at it for the green corridors. Street tree continuity for microclimate regulation. If you remember, we had discussed that. Go back and look at it. Ecological network plans like Singapore, Barcelona. Second group we'll be discussing, that is for the multifunctional landscape design. You are having parks, water retention and biodiversity habitat, or wetland parks. Like we discussed the Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park at Singapore. So nowadays we are getting again and again lot of good examples under this multifunctional landscape design. The third group of planning strategies we can discuss, that is the matrix improvement, that large patch, like increasing the permeable surfaces, green roofs and vertical greening. So you are introducing them. They may be patches at certain scale, but they will be matrix at the end. So urban agriculture integrated into built matrix. The fourth groups we will be discussing, the fourth group we will be discussing is the urban form and heat air quality management, like blue-green networks for ventilation corridor, cool island creation, heat sensitive zoning. These are now very commonly available in the urban planning domain. And the last but not the least is the resilience oriented planning. Planning for redundancy, diversity, or designing for adaptive capacity, spatial buffers for extreme rainfall. So we can see this type of orientation as well in the plannings, which is directly influenced from the landscape ecology theories. So we'll be now looking at these planning strategies or principles which are getting implemented. So good case studies will be discussing. The first one is from the Barcelona superblocks, high density and historic grid, the La Example district. This has very little green space. You can see that on the right hand side. And high levels of pollution and noise. That was the challenge. And the strategy was the retrofitting, the existing grid without demolition. A wonderful strategy. So, from the landscape ecology principle, they brought how to really bring this retrofitting, which will be effective. So, the concept was Green Access Program. Reclaim the 70% of the street space for public use and nature. Definitely, they had to bring several governance decisions as well to make it work. We will see that for this green access, the access words, connectivity and the fragmentation that was being checked first. So the network, the creating a grid of green access connecting the super blocks, that was the network which was being looked properly, and defragmentation strategies like transforming streets into corridors. It was one of the most successful strategy. Ensure every resident is within 200 meter of a green space. That was the target set. And this ecological service from these green network strategies are wonderful. It mitigated the barrier effect of traffic, enabling pollinators and birds to move freely across the city block. Only at the periphery, the motorized vehicles were allowed. Inside, it is only pedestrians, cycles, and non motorized. Ecosystem service benefits, the quantifiable data or the air quality side. You can see how the NO2 level dropped by 25% and PM10 by 17%. Citizen science, biodivert, suited. That's the citizen were monitoring that they recorded 974 species in the urban spaces and they validated that it is a rewilding effect. More and more green spaces, less and less disturbances that brought this effect. The climate, it actually established a 360 climate shelters, schools, parks to buffer the heat waves. A very strong lesson came from this particular effort. Density is not an excuse. Streets are a resource for green infrastructure and it's a retrofitting project. Now we will come to another example where we will find which is not a retrofitting project. The entire paradigm was expanded from the green city to the city in nature. So the evolution is something like moving from aesthetic greening to restoring core ecosystem functions. The policy is integrated into Singapore Green Plan 2030 and ecology is a mandatory layer in the master plan, not an optional overlay. So you can just see how the governance role is important to bring ecology back to the city. Strategic connectivity we can see in this Singapore city example. The project title is actually Park Connector Network, PCN. Over 380 kilometers of corridors linking parks and nature reserves. The natural ways 210 kilometers of specific routes with multi-tiered planting like ground cover, shrubs and canopy. I hope you will be able to look at these particular graphics carefully and closely. The entire effort was having the purpose that they can mimic the rainforest because that's the area. The climate zone is the rainforest, temperate rainforest area. Rainforest structure to support birds and butterfly movement, not just shade for humans. So Green View Index GVI, Singapore is now ranking 2, number 2 in global status, 29.3%, showing high street level greenery. Singapore has actually undertaken ecologically profiling exercise first. They took advantage of the advanced tools and technology like advanced GIS. The method they have used, agent-based modeling and least resistance pathway analysis, which I discussed in this particular lecture only. Again, you look at this land transformation potentiality and link map, you can find so many ecological corridors and new corridors also came up here. Modeled movement for 6 key species, Anadel's rat, hill myna. These are the new discovery in that particular area. Identified the Clementi and Khatib natural corridors, which I was discussing. This is that Clementi natural corridor, this is that Khatib natural corridor. And these were identified and reinforced. Development plans were modified to protect these corridors, ensuring genetic exchange between reserves. Now I will come for the last case study for today's lecture, that is the Hyderabad. And this is a very stark illustration of island biogeography in an urban setting. So this KBN National Park is having 390 acres of dry deciduous forest in Jubilee Hills. The ecological role it played is a green lung, carbon sink, groundwater recharge zone. But the problem started when we could understand it's an extremely isolated matrix and surrounded by a high density, high traffic matrix as well. And high Euclidean nearest neighbor distance to other green patches were identified, that ENN factor, which we discussed at the beginning of this lecture. Actually, in this particular case, the decision came like surrounding this particular KBR park, there will be the flyover, there will be the concrete flyover, and that brought lot of changes into the system. It eroded the eco-sensitive zone. It's a political ecology of buffer zone which has to be considered in your urban design planning or urban planning process. The buffer concept, which protects the core from the edge effects, like we discussed the edge density, ED, noise, light for that. The conflict started when the strategic road development plan proposed the flyovers, as I was mentioning, around the park. The proposal actually is on that particular premise that it will shrink, that eco-sensitive zone will shrink now from 25 to 30 meter width to 3 to 7 meter. So essentially just the walkway they are going to keep. So hard edge of the flyover is bringing pollution and noise directly to the canopy, and that is stressing the wildlife, peacocks, pangolins, and definitely the vegetations. Remote sensing evidence is also there to understand this land use change. The trend is something like that the park boundary is fixed, the surrounding matrix has densified rapidly. So there is no way the park can expand and can absorb that disturbance. Remote sensing studies in similar parks show massive conversion of open or barren buffer land to built up, increasing the contrast index, which is also very important parameter to understand the changes. Without a functional buffer, the park suffers from island biogeography effects. We discussed this particular theory. which means that species extinction due to lack of genetic exchange is happening. And I would like to conclude this particular lecture with the future directions where we would like to summarize that how to go forward. If we understood that landscape ecology, if we understood that it can be applied into the planning, then let us see what to do in future. How to plan our checklist. Urban landscape ecology transforms planning by grounding spatial decisions in ecological theory. How to do it? First, map the landscape, then calculate the matrix. Several models and techniques have been discussed till now. Model connectivity. Where are the natural flow? We have to identify them. Then you layer the resilience, overlay the flood risk and heat island maps. Then you decide the design interventions. You can propose the urban green infrastructures in critical gap areas. We will be discussing this urban green infrastructure and other things in our next modules. So today's summary: landscape ecology fundamentals, landscape ecology theories for planning strategies, models and tools, planning strategies, and the case examples, and we summed up with the future directions. These are the list of references. Thank you.